This is a budget mountain bike. 99% of the budget mountain bikes on the market will be equipped with a front suspension fork. Problem: why? Because 80% of those budget MTB users won't need it, and that's for two reasons. The reason number one is that they are not riding in the terrain that really requires a suspension fork, and reason number two is that the budget, coil and cheap front suspension forks have huge disadvantages. Let me show you 5 of these disadvantages, and then at the end I will give you some buying tips. A short disclaimer first. This is the SR Suntour XCM28 and my video is not a critics of Suntour forks, because they make really good forks, wonderful forks, and I would love to see more of those Suntour forks on the trails and races. But we're talking about just budget forks in general. And here is the first disadvantage, and it's the weight. These are super heavy. A whole bike, this Marine, weighs 15 kilos with the pedals, and the fork itself would weigh around 2.5 kilos, sometimes much more. And that's because cheaper materials used for the to build the fork. There is no magnesium lowers but the aluminum. There is no aluminum steerer but the steel, and that makes the whole structure with this coil springs inside pretty heavy. You're correct if you think, well, this is the leisure bike, so we are not thinking about the weight because we're not gonna, fight or compete over each second. That's right. But with the budget bikes, remember, everything is heavier. And if you have, like this one, 29-inch wheel, that means the fork must be longer as well. That means much more weight. And also those recreational users don't generate so much power. They are usually not so much fit. So a 1 kilo of a weight less would be much better, for example, for some junior or for my wife, which would love to go with me through some MTB trails. So the weight is really the disadvantage. And if you had here just the aluminum alloy rigid fork, the bike would be just considerably lighter. And here is the second disadvantage. These forks would normally not give you too much options in terms of adjustments. That means you have the coil springs inside, and these are like medium soft, medium hard. With the budget forks you won't be able to buy different types of coils, and so you won't be able to make the fork working the best for your weight and the riding style. Let's say the riding style will be the same, recreational, right? But you can weigh 80 kilos, you can weigh 120 kilos, and with the budget bike you will still have same spring. There is some small preload on the bike, on the fork, but it doesn't change too much. The best way of adjusting the fork to our weight would be to have the right hardness or stiffness of our coil spring inside. The budget forks won't give you that option. These forks will usually have the preload adjustment, but it doesn't make so much of a difference, especially between, let's say, 80 kilo, 110 kilo rider. It won't be enough. And here on the other side it has the mechanical lockout, which is a good thing. Third disadvantage is the stiffness of a whole structure. And perhaps you think once more here, we are not talking about some performance, we're talking here about not racing but just leisure use. You are correct. But these stanchions, for example, have 28 millimeters of a diameter. Good forks would have usually around 32 millimeters. That means I can brake the front brake and I can feel the movement in the fork. It's not really stiff. Correct, we are not gonna be racing on this one, but I'm also thinking about the group of people that think about buying budget bikes. Some of those would weigh maybe over 100 kilos, and then if you weigh over 100 kilos you will feel, especially during the braking, that you are not really well connected to your front wheel. So really tiny stanchions, not too much of a material, and cheap material used here will not give you good stiffness. And here we can see the fourth disadvantage of those cheap front suspension forks, and it's the reliability. These are not really durable. This black thing you can see here, that's the dust seal, and it should keep the good stuff inside and the bad stuff outside. On the stanchions we can see a lot of grease. Yes, on the new fork you can see a bit more of the grease on the stanchions, but the grease should be kept inside. That means those dust seals are not really made with the precision, and that's the rule of thumb for most of the budget forks. That means this fork will not be really reliable. The best thing that the manufacturer could do for the customers would be to put those old school rubber boots on those stanchions, but because budget forks are trying to look like those high performance forks, there is no rubber boot on the stanchion, which would really prolong the lifetime of the fork. Well, there is none on the bike that you can just buy in the store, and so the durability of those will not be really good. And the fifth disadvantage of those cheap forks is that they have the spring, which will like soak up the bump, but then it will give you all back because of no rebound. I'm not saying the rebound is weak, there is no rebound on those cheap forks, especially if you're going through some consecutive bumps, like some let's say routes in a row. It will not really feel comfortable on this kind of fork. So question is, who should be thinking about buying this? So, should we simply avoid buying this? Not necessarily, but if there was just one thing you should remember from this episode, is that before buying a budget mountain bike with a cheap and heavy and not really reliable front suspension fork, at least consider yourself buying a so-called cross bike or fitness bike with the rigid aluminum or steel fork. Try those, and if you have the comparison, then you will make the best decision for you.